What do you get when you combine a park that's been on an unstoppable winning streak with one of the greatest roller coaster manufacturers of all time? You get VelociCoaster, a roller coaster that has quickly gained a reputation as one of the greatest roller coasters in the world. It perfectly blends a thrilling ride experience with immersive theming. At least that's what people say. Does VelociCoaster actually deserve this reputation as the perfect roller coaster? Well, to answer that question, we need to take a deep dive into VelociCoaster. But what even is VelociCoaster? Well, VelociCoaster is a 155-foot or 47.2 meter tall roller coaster operating at Universal Islands of Adventure in Orlando, Florida. It's manufactured by Intamin Amusement Rides, which is a prolific manufacturer that's also responsible for manufacturing some of the most famous and notable roller coasters in the entire world, like Millennium Force at Cedar Point, Kingda Ka at Six Flags Great Adventure, and Hagrid's Magical Creatures Motorbike Adventure, which, just like VelociCoaster, is at Islands of Adventure. Location isn't the only thing that VelociCoaster and Hagrid's have in common, though. Just like Hagrid's, VelociCoaster is an LSM, or Linear Synchronous Motor Launch Coaster. It uses two LSM launches to reach a top speed of 70 miles per hour, or 112.6 kilometers per hour. But that's not all these launches do. They also serve another purpose that might not be entirely obvious at first glance. I'll talk about that a little later though. Anyways, as I said, VelociCoaster is at the Islands of Adventure Park in Orlando, Florida. This is one of the two, soon to be three, non-water parks that Universal operates in the Orlando area. And just like basically every large-scale theme park, Islands of Adventure is split into multiple different themed lands, or islands as they're called here. Islands of Adventure has 8 of these themed islands. Port of Entry, which is the Main Street USA of this park, Marvel Superhero Island, which is home to the Incredible Hulk roller coaster, Toon Lagoon, which is where you go if you want to get soaked, Skull Island, which is where you go if you want to get disappointed, the Wizarding World of Harry Potter, this one's also known as Hogsmeade, Lost Continent, which doesn't really have anything, Seuss Landing, the Kiddie Area, and of course Jurassic Park, which is home to Camp Jurassic, Jurassic Park River Adventure, and VelociCoaster. VelociCoaster is very clearly the standard attraction of this land, but don't sleep on River Adventure. It's pretty fun and super refreshing on a hot day. Anyways, VelociCoaster is kind of hidden in the back of the Jurassic Park themed island, so you have to take a little bit of a journey to actually get to the entrance. If you're over by Skull Island, you have to walk basically all the way through the entire land to get to VelociCoaster's entrance. You can take a little bit of a shortcut by walking through the Discovery Center, but it doesn't save that much time. If you're over in Hogsmeade, it's a much shorter journey. Pretty much all you have to do is cross a bridge and boom, you're there. I do warn you though, this bridge can get pretty busy. It's a popular spot to take photos with the Harry Potter castle. There is one other way to get to VelociCoaster, and it's my personal favorite. About halfway through Lost Continent, there's a bridge that takes you straight to VelociCoaster. This isn't just the fastest way to get to VelociCoaster, it's also the most beautiful way, and it gives you some amazing views of the coaster. On that note, VelociCoaster is one of the most enjoyable coasters to watch and take video of that I have ever seen. I'm not sure what makes it as photogenic as it is, but I had a great time recording footage of this coaster. By the way, if you guys want to get some good pictures of VelociCoaster, Me Ship the Olive and Lost Continent are fantastic spots to take pictures and videos from. Anyways, I'm getting a little off track. Once you've completed the journey and made it to the entrance of VelociCoaster, it's time to get in line. But this isn't your grandmother's line. VelociCoaster features an exceptionally well-themed queue. The outdoor section is admittedly kind of boring, but once you get inside, it's just amazing. In the first room, there's this giant statue, and then there's this room where you can see a train go past a window and then some VelociCoasters chase it. Like, what? Then you go into another room, and I feel like I should give a spoiler warning from this point onwards. While VelociCoaster isn't a coaster that necessarily benefits from going in blind, I know some people will want to. So if you don't want the rest of the queue and ride experience spoiled, come back to this video after you've ridden. Now, for the rest of you who don't mind the ride being spoiled, the next room is easily the best room in the entire queue because you get to actually see some Velociraptors. This is really cool and very convincing. If I didn't know better, I would think that there were actually real living dinosaurs in front of me. Universal Creative knocked this one out of the park, and really they knocked the entire queue out of the park. The next room you get into is the lockers, where you have to store everything. These lockers are free, thankfully, and they're pretty easy to use. You just scan your park ticket or season pass and boom, you're in. Then after your ride, you do the same and boom, you got your stuff. Because I had to store my phone, I don't have any video of this station, but it's a pretty generic station. The most notable thing is the video they have playing where Claire Dewing and Owen Grady from the Jurassic World movies are having a Zoom call together. They actually got the real actors to come back for this little video, so that's really cool. The video itself is pretty familiar if you've seen the movies. Claire has an idea, Owen disagrees, movie-type dialogue happens, keep your arms, legs, feet inside the ride, video ends, you board the train, and your journey through the queue is completed. While that might sound like a lot of queue, it does not feel like it, because the operations on VelociCoaster are the best I have ever seen. They send a train on average every minute and 15 seconds. It's insane. Compare that to your average Six Flags' 2 or 3 minute operations, and I mean, the difference is pretty self-explanatory. The line speed is handicapped a little by the lockers, which shouldn't be too big of a deal unless they're letting in more express pass people than they are standby people. Now, this is a topic that can and maybe should be its own video, but I swear to God, they'd let in substantially more express pass people than standby people. This is an issue that happened at basically every single ride at Universal Orlando. That being said, VelociCoaster was one of the lesser offenders, but nonetheless, it was still really annoying. Anyways, small rant done, let's talk about the ride experience. VelociCoaster starts with a powerful launch. This is an LSM launch that takes you from 0 to 50 miles per hour or 80 kilometers per hour in just 2 seconds. That's followed by the first of VelociCoaster's 4 inversions, an Immelman. From off-ride, this Immelman doesn't look like much, but when you're actually on the ride, it creates a surprisingly good moment of airtime. The Immelman is followed by a dive loop, which is the better of the 2 inversions. See, on the Immelman, you got airtime while exiting the inversion, but on the dive loop, you get airtime entering the inversion. This creates a much more sustained moment of airtime because you're out of your seat throughout the entire element. The dive loop then transitions into a turn, and when that turn switches directions, you get another surprise moment of airtime. Once that turn has turned enough, it turns into an airtime hill that then turns into a very turny turn. Try saying that 5 times fast. That turn takes you through some of the great rock work that this area features. See, this entire area is themed to a raptor enclosure because in the story, the people at Jurassic World had a brilliant idea and decided to slap a roller coaster inside an enclosure with real living velociraptors. This is what Claire and Owen were Zoom calling about in the queue. Now, this is the most themed section of the ride, and it does a lot of the heavy lifting in making VelociCoaster an immersive experience. After you exit the rockwork, you hit another moment of theming when the train swerves to avoid an attacking velociraptor. While this moment is cool in concept, you're going so fast through this part that I didn't even notice the velociraptor until I started writing the script. Maybe I'm not the most observant person in the world, but nonetheless, I still think this is a hard moment to notice when you're on the ride. And honestly, this might actually be a negative for the overall ride experience. Because I didn't notice the velociraptor, I thought this moment was a failed attempt at an Outer Bank turn. If you're unfamiliar, an Outer Bank turn is simply a turn where the train banks the opposite way that you'd expect it to. This is an element that creates a crazy powerful moment of airtime if done correctly. That's what I thought VelociCoaster was trying to do here. In all actuality, this was just a standard bank turn. Now, that's followed by another bank turn, which features a transition similar to the one we talked about earlier, where it creates a little fun airtime moment. That turn then takes you through the rockwork again. When you go back through the rocks, the track does this little weird wobble thing. I think this might be trying to be an off-axis airtime hill, but you don't take it with enough speed to actually generate any airtime. I think this element really is the only miss on the entirety of VelociCoaster, and even then, I don't know if I would qualify this as a miss, because it's not a bad moment on the ride, and off-ride it looks really cool. Also, it's basically just a fancy transition to take you to the second launch. The second launch absolutely stomps on the first launch. While the first launch was pretty forceful, the second launch feels like you're taking off in an airplane. It's insane. Surprisingly though, the second launch is actually slower than the first launch. The second launch takes you from 40 to 70 miles per hour, or for y'all non-Americans, 64 kilometers per hour to 112 kilometers per hour in 2.4 seconds. Now, if you remember, the first launch was 0 to 50 miles per hour or 80 kilometers per hour in 2 seconds. It was faster than the second launch, but then why does the second launch feel faster than the first one?
Well, you got me. By all accounts, it doesn't make sense.
Weird statistics aside, this is one of the highlights of VelociCoaster, and it serves as the beginning of the second half. Remember earlier when I said, "But that's not all these launches do. They also serve another purpose that might not be entirely obvious at first glance." I'll talk about that a little later though. This is what I was referring to. The second launch splits the coaster into 2 distinct halves. The first half is slow, compact, and well themed. The second half is sprawling, really stinking fast, but not super well themed. Instead of taking place inside of a well themed raptor enclosure, the second half takes place literally on top of the pathways in the Jurassic Park themed land. The second half is also where the recognizable top hat is, and this is the first element you hit after that second launch. This is a really good moment, and it utilizes the speed that the second launch gives perfectly as you fly to the highest point on the ride. This moment gives some incredible views of Islands of Adventure, although that can be a little immersion breaking when you were just inside of a raptor enclosure and then all of a sudden there's a big old Harry Potter castle sitting there. But there really isn't anything they could do about this, and it is a genuinely fantastic view. The top hat also gives a crazy moment of airtime. You're out of your seat through the entire element. It's amazing. This element in particular is why I think front row on VelociCoaster is the best row. This is surprising because typically the back row is where you want to be for the best airtime. And while the back row definitely does give some good airtime, the front row strangely gives even better airtime. Really though, I don't think there's a bad row on the entire ride. No matter where you sit, you're still going to be out of your seat for like 80% of the ride. Anyways, after you exit the top hat, you take a crazy fast turn which transitions into a zero-G stall that goes over a walkway. I have never seen anything like this before, and it's crazy. When you're on the ride, you can look up, or down I guess, and just see people walking under you. And when you're on the pathway, you can just walk directly underneath a roller coaster. It's crazy. The element is also really good. You get a ton of hang time, and it feels like it lasts forever. The stall then transitions into a turn, which transitions into a wave turn. This moment provides some really good sideways airtime, which is a kind of rare variation of airtime that's pretty fun. This wave turn is also over top of a pathway, and it's actually over top the entrance to the Jurassic Park land that I was talking about earlier. That's part of the reason that I enjoy that entrance so much. Anyways, after the wave turn, you go near the water again, and then you go into this thingy. I'm not entirely sure what I would call this element. It might be an off-axis airtime hill, or it could be an overbanked turn, or it's something else, but it doesn't really much matter because this is a really fun element. It's super snappy in the back rows, and if you're in the left seat, you can kind of lean to the side during the element and then let it snap you back to normal. That's a terrible way of explaining it. Just lean to the side like what I'm doing on Mako here, and then just relax your body, and it makes the element really fun. This is only possible if you're in the left seat, unless you want to lean in front of the person next to you, which I don't really recommend, but to each his own. This is also only possible because of how stinking good the restraints on VelociCoaster are. VelociCoaster features just a lap bar, and it's the most comfortable lap bar I have ever experienced. Honestly, while riding, I completely forgot it existed even while being pushed up against it by airtime. This is a complete godsend because restraints can make or break a coaster. Remember earlier when I said that VelociCoaster was manufactured by Intamin? Well, specifically, it's manufactured using their Blitz model, which is now just named the LSM coaster model. This is a model that's been around for a while, but it's always kind of been held back by big, bulky, and uncomfortable restraints. Just recently, they've ditched these restraints, and the Intamin LSM coasters have entered a new era as quite possibly the best model out there. Anyways, back to VelociCoaster. This element also just looks crazy because it doesn't have any supports, and really it doesn't look like track is supposed to do that. Also, this is another element that you can just walk under. Now, once you've gotten out of the weird thing, you take another turn right up next to the other turn and enter an overbank turn, which is also over a walkway. This overbank turn is followed by a speedy airtime hill. Something I've noticed is that from the exit of the stall to the airtime hill, you don't stop turning, so that whole section is just kind of a fancy helix. Does that actually matter? No, but it's just kind of fun to think about. Anyways, the airtime hill is kind of the calm before the storm because the element that follows it is the greatest element ever created. It's the Mosasaurus roll. This insane element is an elongated barrel roll over the water that creates some of the strongest and most abrupt airtime I have ever experienced. The first time I experienced the Mosasaurus roll, I thought I was going to be thrown into the water, and the second time I experienced the roll, I thought I was going to have the shirt taken off my back. It's an element that words can't really do justice to, so I just recommend booking a ticket to Universal and experiencing it for yourself. Now, while you're still processing what the heck just happened on the Mosasaurus roll, you're hit by two little airtime pops, and then you roll into the brakes. VelociCoaster is a roller coaster where every element it takes is better than the previous one. It just keeps getting better and better as the ride progresses, with the ending being the absolute best part. There really isn't a dull moment throughout the entire ride experience, and I'd even go far enough to say that apart from the outdoor queue, there really isn't a dull moment from when you get into line until you get off the ride. The entire experience of VelociCoaster just keeps building upon itself until the climax with the Mosasaurus roll. Then that begs the question, is VelociCoaster the perfect roller coaster? No, because there's no such thing as a perfect roller coaster. VelociCoaster is probably the closest I've ever seen to a perfect coaster, but it's not perfect because it can't be perfect. Is it the best coaster I've ever ridden? Absolutely, but nonetheless, it isn't perfect. Now, if y'all want to see some really not perfect coasters, my video on stupid coasters is right there.